Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montevilla Sewing Center, and today we're going to talk about how to sew a one-step buttonhole on a computerized sewing machine. Now, you do need a few tools. First of all, a marking pen like the friction pen. This is meant to disappear with heat, either using the little eraser tip here or with an iron. And what it does is it actually changes from, in this case, black to a pale white color. I'll show you when we actually mark it for the buttonhole. I'll show you how this works. And then you need your seam ripper, and this usually comes with your machine. The seam ripper is going to be used for after we sew the buttonhole. We'll need this for opening the buttonhole. Now I'm going to just do the regular square end buttonhole right here. You've got other buttonholes that you can do, but this is the most common one, and this is the one that I usually do on most of my projects. Then with your machine, we have the buttonhole foot. Now the buttonhole foot makes a nice consistently sized buttonhole depending on your button. I'm going to show you how that works. You got your button here. You hang on down here, push up on these corners here to open the buttonhole foot, and you can make a fairly long buttonhole depending on the size of your button. So you zero that right down there. That's going to determine this length here, which your machine will read and know when to do the certain parts of the buttonhole. Again, I'll show you about that. On the bottom of the buttonhole foot, you have these little grippers here. They're kind of rubber grippers, and they grip the fabric so that it feeds evenly as you're sewing your buttonhole. Okay, now the way to put this on your machine, make sure you put it on so the button that you have in here, the main part of the buttonhole foot, is in the back. So let's take this off of here like that. Quick change. Let me put this through here like this and put that right down there like that. Now the buttonhole foot does not have a slit anywhere for your thread to go through, so before I even put it into buttonhole, I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to go needle down, needle up, and take my fabric out of there. And now I've got the top thread through the stitch hole. Now I'm going to put the threads over to the right-hand side. The reason for that, not having them on the left, is because when I sew my buttonhole, the body of my garment is going to be here, and I'd want the thread tails right here, so I can just kind of hang on to them for the first 2 stitches. That's a good habit to have, by the way, when you first start sewing, any kind of sewing. Hang on to the thread tails, just keep your finger on them for the first couple of stitches. Alrighty. Then, the garment that you have, like a shirt or something, now I'm going to use contrast thread to show you the buttonhole, but normally you'd use the same color of thread as your fabric. Now, thread and needles, make sure you use good quality thread and needles. You're just going to have better results, and we sell thread and needles for sewing machines here at Montevilla. Now, when you're making a buttonhole, you want to use more than just 2 layers. 2 layers is not quite enough to support the stitches. When you're making a buttonhole, you need to have 3 layers, like interfacing. Many of you have heard of interfacing. This is a stabilizer, but your interfacing looks a lot like this. Now you can get iron-on interfacing, and that is a nice way to easily and quickly stabilize it. It gives a little stiffness to the fabric. I'm going to give a shout out to Palmer Pletch Interfacing. It's my personal favorite interfacing. Palmer Pletch, Patty Palmer, is the lady that runs that company. Her interfacing is called Perfect Fuse Interfacing, and you can look it up on Google online, and is wonderful. So anyway, so interfacing, another way to interface or give your fabric a little more body is on the front placket of your shirt. You can fold it in 3 times like this. So you've got your raw edge here. It's actually sealed in that fold. And once you make your buttonholes, they're stabilized, and that edge is also sealed. So that's another way we can do that. Of course, you'd want to iron that first to get it nice and flat. Now we're going to go ahead and mark our buttonhole. And this buttonhole, you don't need to mark front and back of the buttonhole. You only need to mark the front. So I'm going to start out with the long, and then just the front edge. And notice that short little line I'm making there. That is going to be covered up by the front bar tack. And then this center line is going to be right down the middle of the buttonhole. So like it would be right here. Okay, so all of that, the marks are all going to be gone. They're going to be either covered up or hidden or cut away. So when you use a marking pen like this, okay, this is my personal favorite, but you can use other marking pens that are intended to give temporary marks to your fabric. Make sure that you don't make really long, big marks, because if your marks don't completely disappear, or if they disappear and come back later, I mean, there's a lot of different marking pens out there, you want them to be gone and disappeared. So that's why I'm recommending make your marks just like that. That's really all you need. Okay, so to get into buttonholes, now this machine has a direct select key right here. You might have to, on some of your, depending on what your machine is, just go by the numbers or a touch screen or something like that. But I'm selecting my buttonhole right here, and as soon as I've selected my buttonhole, notice up here it has this little lever that comes down. So behind your needle threader is a lever that you pull down. Make sure you pull it down so it's behind this little stopper on the buttonhole foot. Make sure it's actually behind there, okay? And I'll show you how that works. I'm going to start out by putting my fabric under there. Now those little rubber stoppers, see how they're kind of hanging up? You can give a little extra lift to your the foot to get that under there. And then you line it right up so that your buttonhole, that long line in the center, is going to be right in the center of that rectangle there. If you look carefully, there's actually a little bit of a dip on your foot right there. You can get it right under there. So don't worry about where your needle is, because your needle is going to be off to one side a little bit. What you want to line up is where the foot is this way. And then you want the little cross mark that's going side to side, you want that about 1 millimeter this side of the opening. To check that, you can lower your needle, and that's right where it's going to be. All right, good. Another thing that we want to make sure of when you're doing vertical buttonholes, you don't want them cockeyed, you want them straight. So make sure that this is also straight. You could have everything lined up just right here, but that's not going to make a straight buttonhole, so this is. The last thing I check is to make sure that that is straight. So we're ready to start making a buttonhole. Now I'm going to put the speed slider right down to nothing so you can see how it starts out. Hang on to these, just kind of keep your finger on them. And it makes a locking stitch to start with, and then it marches backwards. I'm going to speed it up. It makes a straight stitch, a very short straight stitch going backwards. And did you see how it stopped and changed directions? And here it's going to stop again and change directions. The reason why it stopped, now I took my foot off the pedal, but the reason why it stopped and changed directions is the machine, as the fabric is moving, as the foot's moving, is pushing this little lever here. So as you're making your buttonhole, you want to make sure that the garment doesn't have like a cuff or something sitting up here accidentally pushing that. So make sure you manage that part of your fabric. You don't need to guide your fabric because all the guidance is just happening here. Just make sure it's not hanging off the edge of the table so there's no pulling happening. But the machine will do the guiding of the fabric. There we go. It does sort of a two-step bar tack. Now it does the locking stitch. Now I also happen to have the memory cut here on, so it actually cut the threads and lifted the needle for me. Isn't that a beautiful buttonhole right there? So all we need to do now is cut our beginning threads, and you can cut these tail threads right down to the fabric. You do not need to tie a knot because the knot has already been tied by the machine. And the next thing we need to do is we need to open the buttonhole using our seam ripper. Now I kind of like to have a pin right here to guard the end of the buttonhole. In case I give it a really good push, I don't want to be cutting through the end there. So I'm going to start down here at the end, cut towards the center, gently, like that. And I don't go all the way to the end. I just flip it over, reset my pin, start from the other end, and go towards the center, like that. Just gently cut it like that. Okay, so I don't know if you could notice it before, but there was a little bit of that line that was still in the middle there, but that's been basically cut away. Now, we also want to get rid of these extra little threads here. So I'm going to take all that out. It'll make a nicer, neater looking buttonhole if you get rid of those. Plus, you don't want to leave a loop of thread going from one end to the other, because that could end up getting caught in your button. And I like to have my buttonholes look nice and neat. This is one of the perks of doing your own sewing. You can make your project look nice and neat. Okay, so I would always recommend doing a test buttonhole before you actually sew it on your project, because that way you can make sure that your buttonhole is the right size. Some of your thicker fabrics, you may need to have a little bit of extra room, and I'll show you about that. So you had a really thick fabric that you were sewing a buttonhole on, and your test buttonhole wasn't quite long enough. Well, you can actually move this out just a little bit more, another click or two, and that's going to give you that extra length that you need. And then, of course, sew another test to make sure. So I'm going to take my button out of there, and when you're done with your you got your button out of there, just zero that right down, and it's going to fit nicely in the parking spot it's meant for. Okay, so now we test it out. Big drum roll here. Hey, it worked. So the button should go through cleanly through the buttonhole, but not be too loose and not too tight. If it seems like it's a little bit too long, what you can do is next time you cut your buttonhole, cut it a little bit further away from the ends, and then you can kind of know from experience how far to cut that. So that is your basic square-ended buttonhole on a computerized machine. It's really pretty simple. Practice does make perfect, so try these out. Try these buttonholes out, and in no time you'll be able to sew buttonholes on your machine too. If this video has been helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can leave those comments or questions in the area down below. We have lots of other videos here on our Montevilla Sewing playlist, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.